"Don't touch that blue box," Savannah Reed said. And for 1 second even the rain seemed to stop hitting the street. Her white waitress apron lay half-submerged in the gutter. Her old phone blinked beneath a torn scarf, and carbon copy rent receipts bled blue ink across the sidewalk. A hospital tag with her mother's name clung to the side of a crushed shoebox. The landlord smiled like he was helping her disappear with dignity. 3 hours earlier, Savannah had been carrying a silver tray through the private dining room at Vale House Steakroom, balancing 4 wine glasses, 2 untouched bourbons, and the kind of silence rich men used when they wanted servants to forget they had ears. Her feet hurt in the black shoes she had glued twice at the heel. Her wrists ached from 12 hours of refilling water, clearing plates, folding napkins no one thanked her for touching. But she watched everything. She always had. Watching was what poor women did when speaking cost too much. At table 7, a man in a gray overcoat had kept his face turned from the camera above the bar. Savannah noticed because he held his menu too high, like a shield. Across from him sat Calvin Mercer, her landlord, his wool coat dry despite the storm outside, his voice soft and polished as butter on a knife. He did not look at Savannah when she poured his water. Men like him never did, not until rent was late, not until a woman was standing outside with her life in cardboard boxes. By dawn, she was back in Queens, still wearing the black dress from work under her coat, still smelling faintly of steak smoke and spilled Merlot. The first box hit the sidewalk before she reached the steps. Then another. Then her mother's pill organizer cracked open on the pavement, little white tablets rolling into the rain like teeth. Calvin stood beneath a black umbrella while 2 movers emptied Unit 4B through the front entrance. "Miss Reed," he said gently, as if the whole block were a church and he was the only decent man in it. "I gave you several opportunities to handle this privately. You chose drama." Savannah's chest tightened, but she did not cry. Crying made people think the facts had gone soft. She stepped past the neighbors filming from behind wet screens and picked up the blue shoebox before a mover could kick it toward the curb. "I paid every Friday after closing shift," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried. "You signed every receipt." Calvin sighed, almost tenderly. Service workers often confuse cash flow with responsibility. A few people looked away then, because cruelty sounded cleaner when dressed as paperwork. That was when the first black sedan turned onto the street. Then the second. Then the third. Doors opened in order, men in dark suits stepping out without hurry, and finally Dominic Vale emerged from the lead car, broad-shouldered, expressionless, rain touching his black coat like it was afraid to stay. He had not come for Savannah. Everyone knew that before he spoke. His eyes moved over the boxes, the apron, the pills, the shoebox clutched to her chest. He looked at Calvin, then at the eviction notice taped crookedly to the building door. "Problem?" he asked. Calvin's smile sharpened. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Vale. Tenant matter. Unfortunate, but legal." Dominic did not answer. He stepped closer to the notice, read the first line, then the last. He did not look convinced. He did not look merciful either. But his hand stopped at the corner of the paper where a small company mark had been printed in gray ink. Vale Harbor Properties, a name Savannah had never seen on her lease, and a name Dominic Vale had never allowed on public documents. The gray mark looked harmless, almost polite, the kind of corporate stamp a person might miss if rain had not made every other line blur around it. Dominic Vale did not touch the paper. He only leaned close enough to read it, and the silence that followed made the neighbors lower their phones without knowing why. Calvin Mercer cleared his throat. "Administrative partner," he said smoothly. "These buildings involve several entities. I'm sure your office can explain it better than a tenant in distress." Savannah felt the word tenant land first, then distress, each one placed carefully to make her sound smaller. She kept the blue shoebox against her ribs and felt the wet cardboard soften under her fingers. Behind her, Mrs. Alvarez from Tua stood in her robe, one hand pressed to her mouth. A teenage boy on the stoop whispered that she must have been months behind. Someone else said it was sad, but rules were rules. The whole street had become a courtroom, and Savannah was the only one without a suit. A city housing officer in a navy raincoat stepped forward, flipping open a folder protected beneath his arm. Mr. Mercer filed notice of non-payment, disturbance, and refusal of access. On paper, it appears compliant. On paper. Savannah looked down at the apron lying in the gutter, the one she had worn through a double shift, the pocket stained red where she had sliced her finger opening a crate of lemons after midnight. Calvin followed her eyes and bent, lifting the apron between two fingers like a napkin left on a dirty table. "Miss Reed is a hard-working girl," he said, soft enough to sound kind. "But service work can be irregular. Some people start confusing tips with obligations." The red in Savannah's face was not shame. Not completely. It was heat, anger, the effort of staying still. She stepped forward and took the apron from his hand before he could drop it back into the water. From the damp pocket, she pulled out a crumpled coffee receipt, its ink faded but readable. 2:13 a.m., she said. "All-night cafe on Vernon. I bought coffee after closing. Your report says you came to my door at 2:05 because I was home and refused access." The housing officer hesitated. Dominic's eyes moved once, from the receipt to Calvin's face. He said nothing, but one of his men raised a phone and took a picture. Calvin smiled with pity so practiced it almost looked real. "That proves you bought coffee, Miss Reed. It doesn't prove where you slept, whom you let inside, or why management received complaints about shouting." He slid a second document from the folder. "Tenant Behavior Report." Savannah saw her name typed at the top, then words that did not belong to her life. Aggressive, unstable, verbally threatening. She also saw something else. Her mother's name in the emergency contact line. Marion Reed. Not Maribel. The rain kept tapping on the cardboard boxes, on the black umbrellas, on the roof of Dominic's sedans. For one breath, the ordinary sounds came back. A bus groaning at the corner, someone's window unit rattling above, the faint chime of a bodega door opening down the block. Then Savannah's old phone, half wrapped in a towel on top of a broken lamp, lit up. A bank alert flashed across the cracked screen. Monthly rent payment received, Harbor Gate Relief Fund, 3 days earlier. Savannah did not reach for it fast. She let Dominic see it first. His expression did not change, but his voice dropped lower when he asked Calvin, "Why is her rent going to a charity account?" Calvin's smile did not break, but it thinned at the edges, the way ice looks solid right before it gives. "A rent assistance account," he said, turning slightly toward the housing officer instead of Dominic. "Some tenants qualify for temporary routing. Miss Reed has been under considerable strain, and we try to accommodate people before they become a risk to themselves." Savannah heard it then, the careful shift. Not late, not guilty, unstable. He was moving her from debtor to problem, from woman to file. She pressed her thumb against the wet lid of the blue shoebox until the cardboard dented. Dominic did not look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was a locked door and he was deciding which key belonged to it. "Did you apply for assistance?" he asked. Savannah swallowed. Her throat felt raw from the rain and from everything she was refusing to say wrong. "No," Calvin gave a soft little laugh. "People often forget paperwork when they're overwhelmed." "I don't forget paperwork," Savannah said. The words came out quiet, but they cut clean. She opened the blue shoebox just enough to slide 2 fingers beneath the receipts and pull out a folded guest check, creased down the middle, its corner darkened by coffee. For a second, she was not on the sidewalk anymore. She was back under the amber lights of Vale House Stateroom, 3 nights earlier, standing beside table 7 with a silver tray pressed to her hip while men in tailored coats talked through her like she was part of the wall. The room had smelled of charred ribeye, cigar smoke, clinging to wool, and that expensive cologne men wore when they wanted power to enter before they did. Calvin had sat where he never should have been, in the private dining room reserved for Dominic's people. Across from him was Elias Crane, Dominic's lawyer, his voice low enough that the cameras would catch movement but not meaning. Savannah had remembered the wine first because Elias sent it back untouched. Not too warm, not corked, wrong label. He had ordered Barolo and corrected it to Brunello after the bottle was already open, forcing her to step close twice. That was when she heard it. Unit 4B. Parcel 9C. Monday. Make her look unstable. Now, on the sidewalk, she unfolded the guest check on top of the shoebox and held it flat against the rain. Table 7, she said. 3 nights ago, Mr. Mercer was there with Mr. Crane. Calvin's face arranged itself into concern so quickly it felt rehearsed. Savannah, I know you work long hours. Private customers discuss many things. It is dangerous to build stories from fragments. I wrote down orders, she said. Not stories. Dominic's eyes dropped to the check. At the bottom, beneath 2 bourbons, 1 untouched Brunello, and a steak sent back without a bite missing, Savannah had written in tiny block letters. For B. Unstable, Monday, Crane. The housing officer leaned closer, then looked away as if the ink had become too heavy to read. Dominic still said nothing, but his gaze changed. It moved from the paper to Calvin's coat sleeve, then to Calvin's left hand, where the landlord had begun rubbing his thumb over his wedding ring, once, twice, again. A nervous rhythm. Why were you in my private room? Dominic asked. Calvin opened his mouth. Closed it. A community redevelopment conversation, he said at last. Completely ordinary. Savannah reached back into the shoebox and pulled out the shift log she had photographed before leaving work that night, because servers knew managers changed paper when rich men complained. Her name was the only one beside private room, table 7, 10:42 p.m. But the table number had been circled in red, and Dominic Vale's jaw tightened by less than an inch when he saw it, because red circles at Vale House were not used for dinner reservations. They were used when security was being fed. The red circle made the air change around Dominic Vale, but it did not make him move. He only took the shift log from Savannah's hand, studied it beneath the dull morning light, and handed it back as if returning evidence to the person who had earned the right to hold it. Access log, he said. 2 words. Calvin's umbrella tilted slightly. Mr. Vale, with respect, that seems unnecessary. This is a tenant matter, not a security review. Dominic looked at him, and the street seemed to narrow between them. Then it will be quick. They moved into the lobby because Calvin insisted the rain was damaging the documents, though everyone could see he wanted Savannah away from the neighbors' cameras. The lobby had once been beautiful in the way old Queens buildings were beautiful before owners learned neglect was cheaper than repair. Marble walls yellowed at the corners. Brass mailboxes dulled by fingerprints. A chandelier with 3 dead bulbs hanging above a floor slick with rain dragged in from Savannah's shoes and the men in black coats. She stood near the security desk with her blue shoebox pressed to her stomach, her damp apron folded over one arm, her name tag crooked but still attached. The doorman would not meet her eyes. The housing officer set his folder down like a judge laying out a sentence. Calvin spoke softly to the superintendent, an older man named Howard who kept glancing at Savannah as if she had brought shame into the lobby instead of having her home thrown out of it. Let's not make this harder on her, Calvin said, his voice rich with sympathy. Miss Reed has had a very public mourning. If she signs a simple acknowledgement of removal, we can preserve some dignity. He slid a paper toward her. The signature line waited at the bottom, clean and empty. Voluntary surrender of premises. Savannah looked at the words until they stopped being words and became a trap. Her mother's pill organizer was still outside in the rain. Her uniform smelled like gutter water. Her cheeks burned because every man in the lobby was watching to see whether she understood what was being handed to her. She did. She placed the coffee receipt on top of the surrender form instead. 2:13 a.m. The ink was pale, but the time held. I won't sign a lie just because you typed it neatly, she said. Howard swallowed. Calvin's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. No one is asking you to lie, dear. We are asking you to accept reality. Dominic's gaze moved to that word, dear, then to Savannah's fingers, still steady on the receipt. Log, he repeated. Howard turned the monitor toward them. The access history loaded slowly, blue lines crawling across the screen. Unit 4B, entry at 2:06 a.m. manager override. Calvin spoke before anyone asked. Wellness check. She had not responded. We were concerned. Savannah lifted her old phone, the cracked screen lighting her face from below. I clocked out at 1:58. Bought coffee at 2:13. The restaurant is 7 miles away. Calvin gave a small, regretful nod. A receipt proves a purchase. Not character. The words were quiet enough to sound reasonable and sharp enough to make the doorman look down. Dominic did not defend her. He leaned closer to the monitor. Zoom. Howard did. The entry code expanded. CM2. Savannah's breath caught, not from fear this time. That isn't his card, she said. Calvin turned to her with patient exhaustion. Savannah. His is CM1, she said. He waves it at tenants when he wants them to remember he can open any door. For the first time, Calvin corrected too quickly. Both cards are mine. The lobby doors opened behind them before the lie could settle. Elias Crane stepped inside, dry under a black umbrella, shoes polished except for a crescent of gray basement mud along the right heel, and said, Dominic, let me protect you from this scene. Elias Crane did not hurry when he crossed the lobby. Men like him never hurried in front of people who could be made to feel beneath them. He closed his umbrella, tapped the silver tip once against the marble floor, and gave Savannah the kind of smile a doctor might give before delivering bad news he had already billed for. Miss Reed, he said, you have had a frightening morning. No one disputes that. But frightened people sometimes attach meaning to ordinary things. Savannah felt every I turned back to her. The doorman, Howard, the housing officer, Calvin with his hands folded like a grieving pastor. Even the dead bulbs above seemed to lean down and examine her wet hair, her ruined apron, the soft width of her body under the black work dress that still smelled like fryer oil and lemon crates. Elias placed a leather folder on the security desk. Dominic, the access card issue is administrative. Managers carry duplicates. Logs mislabel things. We should not let a clerical irregularity become theater. Dominic did not answer. His silence filled the lobby so completely that Howard's computer fan sounded loud. Savannah looked down at the blue shoebox. The cardboard had begun to collapse at the corners, but the bottom still held. Her mother had taped it twice with clear packing tape, back when Maribel Reed still sat at the kitchen table sorting receipts by month because she believed order could protect poor people from being swallowed. Savannah opened the box and took out the old phone wrapped in a dish towel. It was not her phone. It was her mother's, the cheap prepaid kind with a cracked corner and one saved contact named Baby Girl. Calvin's expression changed for less than a second. Not fear. Recognition. Savannah saw it because waitresses learned to see the moment before a man sent back food he had already eaten half of. This was my mother's, she said. Elias sighed softly. Miss Reed, please consider whether exploiting your mother's illness in a public setting is truly wise. The words landed clean and cruel. Savannah's fingers tightened around the phone, but her voice stayed level. She saved voicemails because chemo made her forget dates. The housing officer shifted. Dominic's eyes moved to the phone, then to Savannah's thumb hovering over the screen. Play it, he said. She did. Static came first, then Maribel's weak breathing, then Calvin's voice, smooth as it was now, only closer, private, stripped of witnesses. Maribel, your daughter needs to stop copying receipts. If she keeps making files, both of you will lose more than 4B. The voicemail crackled. For a moment only, rain against the lobby windows spoke. Then another voice entered, lower, muffled, as if from across a room. 3 words survived the damage. Use Crane's stamp. The recording cut into a beep. Elias looked almost amused. Old phones distort sound. Half a sentence is not evidence. My office uses stamps for hundreds of approved documents. Calvin nodded too fast. Exactly. She hears what she wants to hear. Savannah reached back into the box and placed a hospital bracelet beside the phone. Maribel Reed. ICU intake. Monday, 12:41 a.m. The same Monday printed on the surrender form Elias claimed Maribel had signed in person at 9:30 that morning. Dominic stared at the bracelet longer than he had stared at anything else. His face did not soften. It emptied. The kind of empty that made dangerous men nearby stop breathing through their mouths. Elias began to speak, but Dominic lifted one hand. Not high, just enough. The lobby obeyed. Then Dominic looked at the leather folder Elias had brought, at the stamp visible through the top sheet, and finally at the man who had carried his secrets for 11 years. "Who had my seal that Monday?" he asked. Elias did not answer right away, and that was the first answer Dominic needed. The lobby held still around them, rain ticking against the glass doors, Howard's monitor humming on the desk, the torn edge of Savannah's apron dripping steadily onto the marble. Elias finally smiled, slow and careful. "Your seal is handled by my office, Dominic. As you know, that is why you have an office." Dominic looked at him for a long moment, then turned to the housing officer. "Copy everything. Not loud, not angry, just cold enough that the officer straightened like someone had touched ice to the back of his neck." Calvin shifted. "Mr. Vale, I'm afraid tenant records cannot be removed without proper request." Savannah almost laughed, but there was no joy in it. Proper request. Those words had followed her mother through hospital billing departments, pharmacy counters, courthouse hallways, and rent offices where people looked at Maribel Reed's trembling signature and asked for one more form. Savannah placed both hands on the blue shoebox. "I don't want money," she said. Her voice was tired, not weak. "I don't want a favor. I want my mother's name spelled right. I want him to stop calling stolen rent assistance. And I want every paper they made her sign while she was sick put on a table where somebody can read it." No one spoke. Even Elias seemed to understand the danger of that sentence. Dominic's eyes lowered to the hospital bracelet, then to the surrender form, then to the rent alert glowing on Savannah's cracked phone. "Records room," he said. Howard blinked. "Excuse me?" Dominic did not repeat himself. One of his men stepped beside the superintendent, polite as a shadow. 3 minutes later they were in the basement, where the air smelled of wet concrete, old paint, and paper that had been stored too long beside pipes. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of metal file cabinets. Savannah knew that smell. She had carried laundry down here for Mrs. Alvarez when the elevator broke. She had seen Calvin lock the far cabinet twice and joke that poor tenants would lose their own birthdays if the city did not print them on forms. Howard pulled open a drawer marked 4B. It was almost empty. Too empty. A lease copy. 2 complaint slips. A surrender form. No rent receipts. No maintenance requests. No medical accommodation forms for Maribel's oxygen machine. Savannah reached into the blue shoebox and took out a rubber-banded stack of photocopies. "These used to be in there," she said. "My mother made copies because she said cabinets forget poor people." Dominic took the stack but did not open it fast. He opened it carefully, as if speed would dishonor what it had cost to keep. The first page was Maribel's original lease, signed 11 years earlier. The second was a protected tenancy addendum. The third was a letter from Maribel Trust promising disabled tenants rent stabilization during redevelopment. Dominic's thumb stopped on the letterhead. Maribel Trust. His mother's name, printed above a promise he had once believed meant protection. Behind them, Elias said gently, "Old programs expire. Documents become sentimental after enough hardship." Savannah turned. "Then why is her rent still going there?" The basement went quiet except for the slow drip from an overhead pipe into a 5-gallon bucket. Dominic held out his hand, and his accountant, silent until then, placed a tablet in it. Bank records loaded line by line. Savannah Reed, paid. Mrs. Alvarez, paid. Tommy Dawson, paid. Lena Brooks, paid. 17 names. 17 deposits. All routed through Maribel Trust, then swept into a redevelopment escrow 2 days later. Calvin's breathing changed. Just once. Elias still looked calm, but his right hand slid toward the inside pocket of his coat. Dominic noticed. Savannah noticed Dominic noticing. That was when she saw the contract on the bottom of the drawer, whiter than the files around it, its staple too new. Its final page cleaner than paper had any right to be after 8 years in a basement. She pointed without touching it. "That page wasn't here last winter." Dominic lifted the contract and read the signature line. His own name stared back at him, neat, authorized, impossible. On the date printed beside it, he had been in Chicago burying the woman whose name Elias had been using to empty a building. Dominic closed the folder very slowly, and when he looked at Elias again, he was not looking at a lawyer anymore. He was looking at 11 years of trust wearing a human face. Dominic did not accuse Elias in the basement. He did not raise his voice, did not order anyone held against the wall, did not give Calvin the satisfaction of seeing fury arrive before proof. He only placed the contract back inside the folder, slid Savannah's photocopies beside it, and said, "We're going to dinner." No one understood him except Elias, and even Elias understood too late. Vale House Steakroom was still closed when they entered through the side door 40 minutes later. The dining room had that rich, sleeping quiet expensive places carried before service, white tablecloths pressed flat, wine glasses hanging upside down above the bar, knives lined straight enough to look military. Somewhere behind the kitchen wall, a dishwasher rumbled from the morning prep crew, and the sound made Savannah's shoulders loosen for half a second. She knew that sound. She knew the wet towels stacked under the station, the lemon smell in the drain, the neon beer sign that buzzed over the back hallway even when no one ordered beer in a room like this. Then she saw table 7, and the relief left her body. Dominic stopped beside it. "Sit where you Saturday." Elias gave a thin smile. "Dominic, surely we are past reenactments." "Seat." One word, quiet enough that the bartender polishing glasses froze with a towel in his hand. Elias sat in the chair facing the bar. Calvin stood near the doorway, one hand hovering close to his phone, not touching it. Savannah remained by the service station, the blue shoebox held against her hip. She did not belong in that private room except in the way servants belonged everywhere and nowhere. But Dominic looked at her, not Elias. "Show me." Savannah swallowed and set the guest check on the table. Her fingers did not shake until she saw the red circle again beside table 7. She pressed them flat. "He sent the wine back," she said. "Not because it was wrong. Because he needed me to leave and come back." Elias's eyebrow lifted. A server remembers wine. Remarkable. A server remembers when a man orders Barolo, gets Brunello, and doesn't drink either. Silence moved through the room like smoke. Dominic glanced at the untouched wine glass one of his men had placed in front of Elias for the test. "Pour it," he told Savannah. She did. Not too much. Not too little. The way she had that night. As she leaned in, she pointed past Elias's shoulder to the glass cabinet behind him. "The camera above the bar can't see his hands from there. But that cabinet can." Dominic turned his head. In the dark reflection of the wine glass doors, Elias's lap, the edge of the table, and the place where a man could slide an envelope under a menu all appeared like a secret the room had been keeping. Dominic's security chief opened a laptop. The file loaded slowly, frame by frame, the small spinning circle on the screen making everyone wait. Calvin's phone vibrated once. He looked down by instinct. Dominic did not look at the phone. "Don't." Calvin's hand stopped above his pocket. The video began. Savannah appeared on screen, heavier in the camera's cruel angle, apron tied tight, tray balanced, head slightly bowed. Elias sat with his menu raised. Calvin leaned in. Then the footage skipped. 6 minutes and 18 seconds vanished into black. Elias spread his hands. Maintenance glitch. Savannah reached into the seam of her apron and pulled out the tiny service recorder she used for complicated orders when private guests spoke too fast and blamed servers later. "Then why did you ask me to repeat the specials after you told him to clear 4B? Elias's smile faded for the first time. Dominic took the recorder, but he did not play it yet. He placed it beside the wine glass, the guest check, and the blank contract page like pieces of a trap finally closing. Then he looked at Elias and asked softly, "Which special did she read you?" Elias stared at the table. A man who remembered contracts, seals, signatures, and lies could not remember the soup. Savannah stood beside Dominic now, still wet at the hem, still holding the shoebox, and Calvin Mercer looked at her as if he had just realized the waitress had not come into the room alone. They returned to Queens with the recorder still unplayed, and that was what frightened Calvin most. Not the black cars. Not Dominic's men. The silence around that little piece of plastic. It sat in Savannah's palm the whole ride back, warm from her skin, smaller than a matchbox, heavy as a locked door. By the time they reached the building, the rain had thinned into a cold mist. The boxes were still outside, softened at the corners. Her mother's pill organizer had been placed on top of a folded towel by Mrs. Alvarez, as if kindness could keep medicine dry. Neighbors gathered again, but differently now. They did not whisper as loudly. Calvin tried to reclaim the steps before anyone else could. "Mr. Vale," he said, smoothing his coat. "Whatever private disagreement occurred at the restaurant, this building still operates under legal authority." Elias stood beside him with the leather folder tucked under one arm, his face composed, his shoes now wiped clean. "Correct. Emotion cannot override executed documents." Savannah walked past both men and set the blue shoebox on the same step where Calvin had kicked it an hour earlier. The cardboard sagged, but it did not collapse. She opened it and took out the old lease in a plastic sleeve, the hospital bracelet, the coffee receipt, and the guest check from table 7. She did not look at Dominic first. She looked at the housing officer. "You said on paper it looked compliant," she said. "Then read the paper out loud." The man swallowed. Elias smiled faintly. "Miss Reed, legal documents require context." "Then give them context," Dominic said. 3 words, quiet enough to make the street lean in. Elias opened the folder with practiced calm and removed the authorization letter bearing Dominic's signature, the redevelopment contract, and the surrender form supposedly signed by Maribel Reed. Unit 4B was voluntarily released. The tenant's mother signed before hospitalization. The rest is unfortunate confusion. Savannah placed the hospital bracelet beside the surrender form. ICU intake, Monday, 12:41 a.m. The surrender form said Maribel Reed signed in person at 9:30 a.m. that same morning. For the first time, the housing officer stopped breathing through his mouth. Calvin reached for the paper. Savannah moved it back 1 inch. "Not dramatic. Just enough." "No," she said. "You touched my home. You don't touch her name." Dominic's eyes fixed on the signature. His face did not change until Savannah unfolded the protected tenancy addendum and turned it toward him. At the bottom was another signature, older, softer, written by the woman whose name sat on the trust. Maribel Valle, Dominic's mother. The woman he had buried in Chicago on the date Elias claimed Dominic had approved the contract page. Something went pale behind his eyes. Not fear. Grief sharpened into recognition. Savannah pressed play on the recorder. Static. Silverware. Her own voice reading specials in the private room. Then Elias, clear enough for every phone on the sidewalk to catch. "Once the fat waitress looks unstable, nobody will read her mother's lease." No one moved. Even the mist seemed to hang still. Then Calvin's voice, lower, desperate. "And if she kept copies?" Elias answered, almost bored. "Burn the blue box." Dominic closed his eyes. Once, when he opened them, he was no longer looking at a forged document. He was looking at the woman he had not seen while she carried trays through his restaurant with the truth sewn into her apron. He took the recorder from Savannah, placed it on top of Elias Crane's authorization letter, and said, "Call my attorney." Not his. Dominic's attorney arrived without sirens, and somehow that made it worse. A woman in a navy coat stepped out of the last sedan with 2 city investigators behind her, carrying folders that did not bend in the mist. She did not ask Elias Crane for permission to review the documents. She did not ask Calvin Mercer whether he was comfortable. She placed a legal pad on the hood of Dominic's car, listened to the recorder once, read the hospital bracelet, the protected tenancy addendum, the bank transfers, and the surrender form that a woman in ICU had somehow been made to sign. Then she looked at the housing officer and said, "Suspend the eviction." Calvin's mouth opened, but no sound came out that mattered. The movers were ordered to stop. The locks were not changed. The blue shoebox stayed on the step like a small, wet witness everyone had finally learned not to touch. Elias tried one last time, voice calm, expensive, almost bored. This can be settled internally. Dominic looked at him for a long moment. The whole block waited for rage. It never came. You are internal no longer, he said. That was all. Two men escorted Elias away from the building. Not by the arms, not violently. Just close enough that everyone understood he no longer chose his direction. Calvin's management license was frozen before noon. By 3, the city had opened a formal investigation into forged tenant surrender forms, diverted rent payments, and illegal lockout attempts. By 5, Maribel Trust was placed under independent audit, and the first 17 names Savannah had written on tip envelopes were entered into an official complaint. Not as rumors, not as sob stories, but as tenants with dates, deposits, and rights. Mrs. Alvarez cried when her missing rent credit appeared on the printed ledger. Tommy Dawson sat in his wheelchair beside the mailboxes while a contractor measured the ramp Calvin had removed and promised, on paper, to rebuild it. Lena Brooks brought her twins down wrapped in matching yellow hoodies, and for the first time all morning, Savannah smiled without seeming surprised by her own face. But the hardest part came when Calvin was made to stand on the same step where he had called her unstable. He looked smaller without his folder. I apologize for any confusion, he began. Savannah held the blue shoebox against her chest. Her apron had dried stiff with rain and gutter grit. Her name tag was still crooked. No, she said. Say what you did. The street went silent again, but this time the silence stood beside her. Calvin's throat worked. I lied about your rent. I forged the notice. I tried to throw you out before anyone read your mother's lease. Savannah nodded once. Not forgiveness. Record. Dominic did not step in front of her. He stood at her side while his attorney handed Savannah copies of every filing with her name spelled correctly. Savannah Reed. Not tenant. Not disturbance. Not problem. The movers carried her boxes back upstairs, but Savannah carried the blue shoebox herself. Inside for B, the air smelled faintly of dust, cold coffee, and the lavender soap her mother used to keep by the sink. Dominic paused at the doorway, not entering until she looked back and allowed it. Your mother's care, he said quietly, will be reviewed by my attorney, not my charity. No favors. Paperwork. Savannah understood what he meant. Help that could not be taken back by a man with a stamp. Later that night, after the investigators left and the lobby lights were repaired, Savannah hung her clean apron on the back of a kitchen chair. Dominic set a hot coffee beside the blue shoebox, now dry and reinforced with new tape, its receipts flattened, its recorder labeled, its hospital bracelet resting on top like proof that Maribel Reed had not disappeared into someone else's lie. Savannah touched the name tag in her palm, newly polished, the letters clear under the warm apartment light. You saw the box, she said. Dominic looked at the receipts, the old phone, the lease, then at the woman he should have seen long before the street filled with cars. No, he said softly. You made us read it. And for the first time in that building, the truth was not whispered behind a service tray, folded into a shoebox, or drowned out by power. It was spoken in Savannah Reed's name, and everyone finally listened.